The Pilgrims didn't wash their ass.
This man needs help. His baby mama put him out and he ain't got no furniture.
Let him have it.
Boss lady, this man needs a bed. And all he can afford is $69 a month. How you gonna get another one without a bed?
Come on, baby.
This man needs a TV for his bedroom. All he can afford is $59 a month. You know he got all them children.
73 inches, baby.
Happy 4th of July, motherfuckers. This is Superhuman TV Show. Today I'm gonna get hit with fireworks. This is for juggalos and juggalettes. Do not try this at home, and I hope you like it. Whoop, whoop! Light that bitch up! Fuck this shit! Ah! Fuck!
Black. I am Filipino-Japanese, second generation. I'm a disabled trans man. But I'm also a Medicaid patient. I'm also a person who uses food stamps. I'm also a person who has been through houselessness in this country. I am also a person who has gone through substance use and addiction. And most of all, I am a patient of Planned Parenthood.
Oh my Lord. What?
I am everything that Donald Trump and Elon Musk want to erase.
Shut the fuck up. You're sitting in the police transport van after a protest?
Shut the fuck up. In a holding cell with your comrades?
Shut the fuck up.
Did you know there are towns in South America that still wave a Confederate flag or speak German with a 1940s accent? Because after the Civil War, some Confederates fled the US to places like Brazil, settling in a place called Americana. They brought their language, their customs, and yes, some even try to bring slavery with them. Today, Festa Confederata is held annually, where folks dress in Confederate gray in Brazil. And you know, when you really think about it, it's not that outlandish because Brazil was the largest importer of slaves. They figure around 5.5 million slaves were imported to Brazil. You know, if anybody flinched at the loss of the Confederates, it was probably the aristocracy in Brazil. And then came the Nazis. After World War II, top officers and war criminals fled to Argentina, Chile, and Brazil using secret escape routes called rat lines. Colonia Dignidad in Chile was a German-run cult-like enclave with deep ties to Nazi ideology. Argentina quietly welcomed thousands of Germans, including Adolf Eichmann, a mastermind of the Holocaust. Some towns in Bariloche, Argentina still have Alpine-style architecture and whispers of SS ties. Today, these towns are controversial legacies, part museum, part denial. Some locals honor heritage, others whitewash history. Schools teach German history. Confederate pride is displayed along Brazilian flags. But human rights groups continue to call for accountability and truth. History doesn't always stay in the past. Sometimes it builds a town, throws a festival, and waves a flag, far from where the story started.
Hey, I'm Katy Perry.
Shut the f up.
This space trip with a few other women almost exposed the truth. It's all Jeff Bezos' bad acting that raised suspicions. He tripped before opening the hatch maybe, too excited. When we went to open the door at the scheduled time, he wasn't even at the hatch yet. So, we quickly closed it again and let Jeff pretend to open it from the outside. Also, everyone's asking why we didn't wear helmets or traditional space suits, but instead wore tight, low-cut outfits and high heels. Come on, we're celebrities. How could we ditch our makeup and high heels on camera? It's part of being a celebrity.
Tell your mother to shut the f up.
We even wore big jewelry into the cabin. Normally, jewelry isn't allowed in space, but we got special permission because Lauren Sanchez needed to show off her 20-carat engagement ring from Jeff to prove how strong their love is. So we all wore jewelry too. And in zero gravity, our hair should have been floating, but it wasn't. The truth is, we were just in a movie studio pretending to be in zero gravity for the camera. Also, did you notice Jeff Bezos touched the capsule with his bare hand, proving it wasn't hot? But when the capsule re-enters the atmosphere, it usually gets super hot and leaves burn marks. And when it landed, the huge impact didn't even affect the nearby bushes. We didn't rehearse beforehand, so there were a lot of slip-ups. Do you think our little show seemed realistic enough?
The Pilgrims didn't wash their ass. Why were the Pilgrims and the European settlers so reluctant to cleanse themselves? Well, I found an excellent article from History.com that discusses this very topic. Before we get into that, how did natives wash themselves, and how did it impact and influence those who were newly arrived? So Native Americans would use cold water and different plants, like the soapweed yucca plant, in order to cleanse themselves. Many plants have antimicrobial properties, and they even used plant fibers to help exfoliate the skin. In addition, they also had mouthwash using this plant, which is wildflower gold thread. It was used as mouthwash and as a mouth cleanser, and on the gums for dental pain, and also for teething. And even when it came to Native Americans using the bathroom, you had a really good sense of don't poop where you eat. So a hole would be dug not too far from where people live. The excrement would be put in the ground rather than on top because predators can track that kind of stuff. Or it would be excreted into water that was downstream because we understood the importance of raw sewage and how it can affect our health. England could have definitely taken some tips on that if you know anything about how polluted the Thames River became due to raw sewage. So anyway, back to the Stinkies. So when the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth in the early 17th century, they didn't smell good. I love that History.com says they didn't smell terrific. And according to Native American accounts, like the Wampanoag who did bathe regularly, the Europeans did not. Natives even tried and failed at convincing them to wash themselves. Bathing, as you and I know, was very, very uncommon among Western Europeans until the later part of the 18th century. Which is why I find this kind of wild because y'all weren't taking care of your undercarriage. We had to teach you to do that, and then you didn't even want to do it. And this wasn't just like the lower class people. This went for all social classes. Louis, though, I forget how to do these numbers, 10, 5, 6, Louis the 16th? No, that doesn't sound right. I forgot how to do these. But one of the Louis, 17th century king of France, is said to have only taken 3 baths in his entire life. Could you imagine what slobbing on his knob must have been like? Ugh. Anyway. So both rich and poor might wash their faces and their hands on a daily basis, but almost no one in Western Europe washed their whole body. And so the Pilgrims and the Puritans who followed them may have even thought that submerging their whole body in water was unhealthy, and taking all of their clothes off to do so was immodest. So that's why John and Jacob look like this over here, wearing all these heavy layers of clothing in the heat. Yuck.
The royal families of Europe are full of transsexuals, and they hate women. They and the Vatican control America. It gets sickening by the moment.
I mean, isn't that, but it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, the royal families of Europe are full of, trannies, basically. Trans people, transsexual. I mean, that's kind of mind-blowing, right? Really?
It is. Now, you could imagine that would have been feasible in the old days, before the use of photographs and video and all of that, where the people wouldn't get to see them very often, and when they did, they wouldn't get much chance to study them.
Yeah.
And when the camera became available and video and film footage became available, we had a brief window where we could see them in the raw, if you like. But in the last 20, 30, 40 years, they appear to have greatly improved the quality, so that they're much more convincing transgenders now.
Yeah.
And of course, they carry out more surgery on them now. I would recommend, if you're interested, to go out and check some of the junior members of the British royal family.
Oh yeah,
the ones who are around 5, 6, 7, 8. They are just like little boys, you know.
Yeah.
But by the time they're 13, 14, 15, between the chemicals and the hormones, the surgery and so on, they will be more convincing females than they are at the moment.
Yeah, it's just such a strange thing to do, you know, for just normal people like us. We just think, why would anybody want to change their gender or pull out, try to do this deception? And now, do you think it's something they have to do to please their gods, right? Their masters?
I think it is. I think it's part of this cult, club, society. You know, Mrs. Thatcher made a famous remark years back. She was one, and she spoke about a certain person who was getting above a station, and she was saying, he is not one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And, at the time you would tend to think, well, they're speaking only of the power elite. But now that we have a different coloration on that now, because we see it could possibly mean that he wasn't a member of this club.
One of us, yeah.
One of us.
Sure, there is some
and I think the Mitfords used to have a term, you and non-you. The you being us, and of course the non-you being the rabble. And if you're one of us, then of course there must be some physical evidence that you have joined this club.
When did Irish people become white in America?
Mm-hmm. Go for it, John. When did the Irish become white? And how long have you been white, Joe?
As a recently visibly white guy, it's a complicated history. W.E.B. Du Bois made a famous statement about the condition of blacks in America in 1890, early 1920s, and indicated they were the poorest in all of America, except for the Irish immigrants, who were the poorest. Mm-hmm. And they were called Black Irish, and were despised by all the other immigrants who had already come in there, except the blacks at the time. And the Irish were able to scrape by on the generosity of the black people. Once their economic condition surpassed that, they no longer used that phrase and became white.
There have been numerous instances of groups becoming white in the United States. Mm-hmm. The Italians, right. Jews, Eastern Europeans as well. But there's been a hard barrier for black people, and this is what I think gets to anti-blackness specifically as a barrier that people can't cross. Black people don't get to become white in the United States, but lots of other people will get to become white, or white presenting, to use the old South African terminology, honorary white, even if you're not actually white, except for black people.
I remember a debate between James Baldwin and William Buckley in London. Because Buckley's argument was, okay, you blacks, if you just do what other people had done, you will be thriving economically and politically speaking. And Baldwin says, okay, well, actually, that is possible if we manage to change the color of our skin. Because of the color of our skin, you don't let us vote. You don't let us live in the neighborhood where we wanted to live, etc., etc. Yep. So this is a way to say that, of course, passing is possible for a certain number of groups, but it is not something that is available to the majority of black people in the United States. And that is the case still today.
Why are white people called Caucasian? Well, it's because of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, a German scientist from the 18th century. In his work, Blumenbach categorized humanity into 5 major races based on cranial measurements and geographic location. He named one of these groups Caucasian after the Caucasus region, particularly Georgia, which he believed was the origin of the most beautiful humans. Blumenbach viewed this area as the cradle of humanity because of its geographic location and the perceived beauty of its inhabitants. Now, his contemporaries used his work to create a racial hierarchy with Caucasians at the top. This framework justified imperialism and slavery, making the word Caucasian synonymous with whiteness and superiority. Over time, Caucasian became a legal and social category in Western societies, particularly in the US. Now, anthropologists have largely abandoned the use of this term due to its flawed history and lack of scientific validity. However, it persists in medicine, law, and everyday language. Isn't that interesting?
Cop knocks on your door?
Shut the f*** up.
Texting on an unsecured device?
Shut the f*** up.
I really like to read books because they tell you a different side. They tell you something that, maybe you weren't told about. But it's interesting, when you get into the Federal Reserve, you realize that the Federal Reserve runs the economy. They increase the interest rates and tank the economy whenever they feel like. Then we get into Social Security, income tax, and good old Karl Marx. That's where Social Security came from. Then someone's like, what do you mean all the parties are taking over and complete control of the policy based on the Federal Reserve? Look at that. This is a great one too. The sudden death of 1928 leads to the Great Depression by bankers. President of Banker Trust. People might ask, well, who runs it all? The Rothschilds, the Lazards, the Loebs, Warburgs, Lehmans, Goldman Sachs, Rockefeller family, and check that, J.P. Morgan. All books like this came out and they burned them. Why is your country at war? Woodrow Wilson ordered government agents to seize and to destroy the printing plates and copies of this book in the spring of 1918. Wonder why that is. You got this fun one. The price of gold is set by the Rothschilds. We go to the Rothschilds and their plan of action. These are 10 steps to destabilize economies and create, interesting, a new world order under one government. Remember in Germany when they arrested the Rothschilds? You get into the Bolshevik Revolution, remember that whole thing? Orchestrated by bankers, this banker specifically. And And then we go to who has stock in the Federal Reserve. Look at the names. You might know a couple of them. There's a couple more, and they're all connected to the Rothschilds and the Bank of England.
They rob you blind, and you thank them for it. That's a tragedy. That's a scam. That's why I'm saying this right now. Americans, you don't need a tariff. You need a revolution. For decades, your government and oligarchs ship your job to China, not for diplomacy, not for peace, but to exploit cheap laborers. And in the process, they hollowed out your middle class, crushed your working class, and told you to be proud while they sold your future for profit. And yes, China made money, but we used it to build roads, lift millions out of poverty, fund healthcare, raise living standard. We reinvested in our people. My family also benefited from it. What did your oligarchs do? They bought yachts, private jets, mansions with golf course driveways. They manipulate the market, dodge tax, and pour billions into endless wars. And you get stagnated wages, crippling healthcare costs, cheap dopamine, debt, and flagged wave property made in China while they pick your pocket. For 40 years, both China and the United States benefit from the trade, the manufacturing, but only one of us use that wealth to build.
Zionist Playbook, additional talking points, and how to counter them. There was never a Palestinian state. Purpose implies that because Palestine wasn't a formal state, Palestinians have no rightful claim to the land. Counter. Statehood isn't a prerequisite for national identity or sovereignty. Palestine was home to an indigenous population with a distinct culture, governed international recognition before Zionist colonization. Jews bought the land legally. Purpose justifies Zionist land acquisition by suggesting it was all legal and voluntary. Counter. Jewish land purchases before 1948 were limited, but Israel's creation relied on ethnic cleansing, not legal transactions. You can't buy sovereignty over an entire country by purchasing small plots. Palestinians rejected peace offers. Purpose blames Palestinians for the lack of peace while ignoring Israel's violations. Counter. Every peace offer demanded Palestinians accept permanent occupation, fragmented territory, and no real sovereignty. Rejecting a surrender isn't rejecting peace. Arabs expelled Jews from the Middle East. Purpose justifies Zionist actions by pointing to the expulsion of Jews from Arab countries. The displacement of Jews from Arab lands was tragic, but it doesn't justify the displacement of Palestinians. Ethnic cleansing isn't a valid response to past injustices. Palestinians are human shields. Purpose blames Palestinian civilians for their own deaths to justify Israeli military attacks. Counter. Israeli attacks kill entire families in their homes. Calling them human shields is a propaganda tactic to excuse war crimes.
Black Americans turned their backs against the U.S. and fought alongside the Filipino resistance during the Philippine-American War. If caught, these soldiers were deemed as traitors by the U.S. and then hanged in public. These black soldiers couldn't justify their participation in the possibility of Philippines and the rest of Asia being subject to the same invasion, slavery, and destruction that was placed among them and the Native Americans in the U.S. They feared that the same thing would happen to Philippines and they couldn't stand it. One of these brave soldiers was Captain David Fagan, who was a highly skilled guerrilla officer. He led 8 military operations, which helped temporarily give Philippines an advantage in the war, but we know how it turned out. US deemed him as a traitor and put a 600 bounty on his head, but he was never found. Dehumanizing tactics used on Black Americans were also exported to the Philippines during the American colonial period. They deemed Filipinos as the N-words of Asia. Because of this, the US embedded anti-Blackness and colorism within Filipino society and culture to destabilize and keep Filipinos and the small black population there divided. The US actually left Philippines in a worse situation than Spain ever did, and their kill count was a lot higher, but that's a conversation for another day. It is Black History Month, and one other way that they are related is that the Spanish also brought enslaved Africans over to the Philippines during their colonial period. Happy Black History Month, and thank you to our Black allies.
This is a picture of the man who wrote the King James Version of the Bible, or at least he's given the credit for writing it. He was the supreme slave master, King James. In fact, it was King James who threw slavery into high gear. In fact, it was the slaves were brought to Jamestown. They named in 1619, they named the place where they brought the first slaves after King James, the Bible man. Okay, so we have to start really looking at these things. course, King James dealt very, very highly in witchcraft. Most of us are familiar with his book, the Bible, but how many are you familiar with his other book? Is there anybody in here familiar with his other book? He also wrote a book on witchcraft. And this is a library book, so I didn't write it or anything, but you can send the pictures back up here, because I need to keep them together. Thank you. Oh, okay, send them around this way. This is a picture, this is a copy of King James's book on witchcraft. Particular book on witchcraft, he deals with the art of imitation. See, the media is all about imitation. Children were often the victims of witches. So we have here, now these are not black people on this picture. These are Europeans. And they are doing their sacrificing children. You will see a nun kneeling, and you will see, but they're kneeling at the behind of a goat.
You really think they woke up and said, wow, black people are human after all. Let's be nice. They didn't desegregate because they loved us. They desegregated because they couldn't afford to look stupid on the world stage. And they couldn't afford to let us get too powerful without them. After World War II, America was busy trying to sell itself as the leader of the free world. You know, democracy, liberty, justice for all. All the same stuff they were never giving to black people at home. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was pointing and laughing. Freedom? Y'all can't even let black kids drink from the same water fountain. And America? They couldn't bomb their way out of that bad press. So the same people who spent decades lynching us, burning us out of towns, and pretending we didn't exist, decided it was time to clean up their image. Desegregation was never about morality. It was always about marketing. One thing they never tell you about desegregation, we weren't begging to sit next to them. We were thriving without them. Black businesses were booming. Black schools were educating future doctors, lawyers, and scientists. Black neighborhoods were self-sufficient. And they couldn't have that. Because if we didn't need them, they couldn't control us. Simple math. But instead of congratulating us, they used desegregation as a way to bulldoze everything we built. Black schools shut down. Black teachers fired by the thousands. Black businesses starved out once the black dollar started flowing into white businesses. Yeah, they didn't integrate with us. They absorbed what we built and threw the rest away like leftovers. And today they have the nerve to ask why black communities are still rebuilding. Because y'all didn't just move the goalpost. Y'all burnt the whole field. Desegregation wasn't a handshake. It was a hostile takeover. They didn't open the doors because they respected us. They opened the doors just wide enough to flood everything that we built and call it progress. So the next time somebody tells you to be grateful for desegregation, remind them that we didn't get rights because they loved us. We got them because we fought like hell while they smiled for the cameras. They didn't integrate us. They invaded us. And we're still rebuilding what they couldn't steal.
So a lot of folks have heard this phrase, right? 40 acres and a mule. As you say, a lot of people thought, okay, this just never happened. And your reporting is called 40 Acres and a Lie. What's the truth behind this program? What do people not know?
What people don't know is that it wasn't just a promise that was broken. People were received land titles. We found more than 1,250 people who got land titles, men and women. They picked out their plots of land, mostly on the plantations where they were enslaved. Actually, not everyone got 40 acres, which is another misconception. It was up to 40 acres. And then people were living there. They were planting their crops. They were selling them in Savannah. Some of them formed governments. They elected a sheriff. They were living their lives, and they lived there for up to a year and a half before they were kicked off.
How did they get kicked off the land that the government gave them?
Basically, because Lincoln was assassinated. They had promised this land. They gave land titles. The government said, this is yours. You deserve it. You're going to keep it. But Congress needed to make those titles permanent. They had a majority in Congress who were willing to do it. But Andrew Johnson, he was the vice president. He was a white supremacist. He sided with the planters who wanted their land back, and he vetoed every effort to make those land titles permanent.
You did a little more research to talk about the value of the land. This is an important part of your reporting here. 1 4-acre lot that you identified in Jacksonville, Florida, based on a sale last year, that it would, today, 40 acres would be worth $2.5 million there. It's not just the land that was lost here in your reporting. Tell me about what else you found.
Yeah, well, just that generational wealth that wasn't passed on. You know, this 40 acres land was all the coast. It's like expensive coastal real estate. We found gated communities, golf courses, and restaurants, incredibly valuable lands. This is wealth that was not passed on, and that's kind of what we're trying to show is the impact. This is not a history lesson only. It's the impact on people who are alive today.
What they pulling you over for? And she need to pat you down for expired tag? I thought expired tag, you could just get a ticket. What's the need to pat down? Don't consent to no searches or none of that. I can speak freely.
Okay, you need to back up.
I am back. Like I said, you're a passenger, so you don't gotta ID yourself and just don't consent to no searches. Honestly, she's not even supposed to detain you as a passenger. So make sure when it's over, you get her name and badge number and you file a formal complaint. Long as you say your part, that's all that matters. Because you could take her to court, she digging in your pockets. You not under arrest. But he not under arrest. You only supposed to do a frisk, a pat down on the outside. Yeah, you only supposed to pat down the outside of his pockets. So that's unlawful. That's a full search. Now that's a full search what you just did. Well, I know how to do it better than you, obviously. See, passenger, that's why you always film. You don't never let them pull you over. Driver as well. Don't never get pulled over without taping. She literally said she pulled you over for expired tags, but y'all both in the back seat being detained. That don't even make sense. She know I'm right.
White supremacists have a weird thing for the number 14. They believe it stands for the 14 words, which I'm not going to say on here because it's gross and the video might get flagged, but you can go look that up for yourself. But anyway, so Leon tweeted this yesterday, which is 14 American flags, quoting a Donnie tweet that says, "He who saves the country doesn't violate any law." You know, this is a dog whistle to all the other Yahtzees out there that believe this shit. He's telling them that it's okay to do whatever they want in the name of white supremacy. Like, we all saw him do the salute, and he's back the Yahtzee party in Germany, and now this. So do any of y'all out there really believe that this fucking apartheid-loving South African isn't a full-on Yahtzee now? Like, look up his grandfather on his mother's side. The man literally left Canada to move to apartheid South Africa because he agreed with the whole concept. Like, and any of y'all out there that's trying to defend this shit or, like, saying it's not what it seems, like, you need to wake the fuck up and get on the right side of history ASAP.
Hey, good morning. Here's a moment in white history. Have you ever wondered how we found out the proper amount of vitamins, nutrients, minerals, or calories we needed to consume in a day in order to survive? You can thank Dr. Lionel Bradley Pett, who found out exactly what it took to keep the human body alive by starving native children to death. The experiments were performed by the Department of Indian Affairs of Canada under the direction of two physicians. One, Dr. Percy Moore, the Indian Affairs Branch Superintendent of Medical Services, and Dr. Frederick Tisdale, a famed nutritionist and former president of the Canadian Pediatric Society. The First Nations nutrition experiments, as they were called, were a series of experiments run in Canada by the Department of Pensions and National Health, now known as Health Canada, in the 1940s and 50s. At the lowest estimates, these experiments were conducted on at least 1,300 indigenous people, with at least 1,000 of them being children. In these experiments, parents were not informed, nor was their consent given. In the 1940s, Canadian officials became aware that Native children in these residential schools were malnourished. So the Canadian government sent researchers to figure out why these indigenous children were malnourished. Meanwhile, this evil bastard wanted to know what the recommended intake for different vitamins and minerals should be. He saw the hunger and malnutrition at residential schools as an opportunity to figure out just what the human body needed to survive. So in 1947, he began conducting experiments on about 1,000 children in 6 residential schools across the country. Instead of giving these innocent children food to treat their malnutrition, he gave them supplements like riboflavin and thiamine to see if it would mitigate these problems. It did not. In another experiment, instead of giving these innocent children food to eat, he gave them pieces of enriched bread, thinking that that would improve their malnutrition. It did not. They became anemic and they died. Even though indigenous children were dying, they still continued these experiments. Most of these innocent children were so malnourished that their teeth would fall out, but they wouldn't take them to a dentist because they wanted to see the effects of malnutrition on gum health. Over 1,000 indigenous children were starved to death in these residential schools, and the experiments kept going. Why? because they were already marginalized and vulnerable. Nobody was looking out for the best interest of these children. They had no voice and no one to advocate for their best interest. It's because of the starvation and deaths of innocent indigenous children that we now know exactly how many calories, vitamins, nutrients, and minerals the human body needs to stay alive.
People talk glibly about science. What is science? People coming out of a university with a master's degree or a PhD, you take them into the field, and they literally don't believe anything unless it's a peer-reviewed paper. It's the only thing they accept. And you say to them, but let's observe, let's think, let's discuss. They don't do it. It's just, is it in a peer-reviewed paper or not? That's their view of science. I think it's pathetic. Gone into universities as bright young people, they come out of them brain dead, not even knowing what science means. They think it means peer-reviewed papers, etc. No, that's academia. And if a paper is peer-reviewed, it means everybody thought the same, therefore they approved it. An unintended consequence is that when new knowledge emerges, new scientific insights, they can never, ever be peer-reviewed. So we're blocking all new advances in science that are big advances. If you look at the breakthroughs in science, almost always they don't come from the center of that profession. They come from the fringe. The finest candle makers in the world couldn't even think of electric lights. They don't come from within. They often come from outside the breaks. We're going to kill ourselves because of stupidity.
Here's why I never, ever, ever smell the roses from a grocery store or retail florist.
And why I would never set up a rose petal bath for someone I care about.
And why I use gloves if I have to work with them.
In order to meet the pretty strict guidelines for import into the United States.
Oh, look, it's a rabbit.
Roses specifically, and I don't know what the case is with the other flowers, but during the post-harvest process, they go through a pretty intense, how should I say, like fungal treatment. I'm going to read you a passage from a book called Flower Confidential that was written by Amy Stewart, I think over 20 years ago at this point, where she kind of did like a little expose thing about the cut flower industry. This is her first person testimony as she visits a rose farm in South America. So I watched as bundles of roses went into the barrel of fungicide, head first, then got turned over and dipped again, stem first. This had to be the nastiest job in the production room. The men handling the roses wore respirator-style masks and carried the flowers to the opposite side of the production room to do the dip, but there were no masks for the rest of us, and the smell was horrible. Every grower assured us that they were taking all the necessary precautions to protect their workers and keep the chemicals out of waterways, but keeping runoff contained seemed like an impossible task. The guys in charge of the dip were drenched in the stuff. It spilled on the floor. It dripped off the flowers. For the first time in all the months I'd spent looking behind the scene at the cut flower industry, my heart hardened against the flowers themselves. So I said to one of the production managers, trying to sound casual as I watched the flower being dunked in fungicide, "About this dip, does it remain on the flowers long?" "No," he said. "The more time that passes, the more it loses its effectiveness. As a contaminant for humans, it's very low. But," and he flashed me a warm smile, "I would never recommend that you take a bath of rose petals. Never." So yeah, think twice.
You know that bright red fire retardant they drop from planes onto fires, like this stuff? Well, I wanted to know if it's actually safe. The problem was the U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, and the company that makes it, no one would share any samples with me for testing. So I literally had to hike up into the mountains after fires, gather a whole bunch of trash, plants, and dirt just covered in the stuff, bring it to researchers at USC, who finally tested it, and we found toxic heavy metals: arsenic, cadmium, chromium, manganese, copper, vanadium, thallium, zinc, and lead. The retardant is called phosphatic, and nearly 500,000 gallons were dropped on LA during the Eaton and Palisades fires alone. Now, the company that makes it says it meets safety standards and that has been tested extensively. However, test results weren't shared with us, and nowhere in the safety data sheet for the product does it say that heavy metals may be present. So how concerned should you be? Well, when it comes to, say, nature, the heavy metals can run into streams and possibly kill creatures there. But for you, public health experts we spoke with said the levels in our samples were low enough that if you come into contact with some on a trail, say your pet runs through some plants with it on it, wash them off, wash your hands, you'll be fine. For people like firefighters who come in contact with it all the time, there may be risk that's not fully understood. So the question here is, how surprised are you?
A lot of this environmental question depends on, I think, a very flawed fundamental presupposition. It depends on the idea that carbon dioxide is pollution. And I would argue, after interviewing hundreds of scientists, including many who've worked for the UN IPCC, many of the leading scientists in the world, that the notion that CO2 is pollution is absolutely preposterous. We exhale about 2 pounds of it every single day. The proportion of greenhouse gases made up of human CO2 emissions is a fraction of 1%. The idea that that is going to destroy the planet or change the temperature of the earth is, frankly, in my opinion, totally ludicrous. But from a totalitarian perspective, if you can convince people that CO2 is pollution, there's no human activity that doesn't result in CO2 emissions, including living, including dying, turning on a light switch. Every single aspect of your life, then, if we submit to the idea that CO2 is pollution, then comes under the regulatory control of the people who claim to be saving us from pollution. So when they do these environmental studies and they say, well, your CO2 footprint will be smaller if you eat bugs or you do this, that, or the other, you drive an electric car, that doesn't show anything about whether that's going to benefit the environment or not. In fact, CO2 has actually been very beneficial for the environment. In interviewing Trump's climate advisor, Dr. William Happer, a physics professor at Princeton University, he said the Earth is starving for more CO2. And since we've had a little bit of an increase in atmospheric CO2 over the last 100 years or so, plants have gotten much greener, agricultural yields have improved. So I think we need to also talk about the fundamental presupposition here. Is CO2 really pollution? If it's not, then all these alleged environmental benefits are completely fictional.
We have been cooling down for the last 4,000 years. So if people say, oh, the planet's warming, well, it's all about when you start the measurements. If we look at the last 38 years, there has been no change in temperature. If we look in the last 150 years, we've had 3 warming periods and 3 cooling periods with a total warmth of about 0.6 degrees Celsius. Now, I wonder why it warms. I mean, 1850, now what happened then? Oh yes, that was the end of the Little Ice Age. Do you think it's going to warm or cool after a Little Ice Age? Of course it's going to warm. So if you start taking measurements from 1850 in the Industrial Revolution, we have been warming. If you take measurements from the medieval warming, we've been cooling. We've cooled about 5 degrees since then. If you take measurements from the Roman warming, we've cooled about 5 degrees. So as soon as someone tells you, oh, it's warming, the reply you give is, since when?
The massive limbs that did petrify are buried under the hills and the mountains, and right in plain sight, though most of us would never notice. Take a look at this video of a gentleman walking alongside this mountain, showing that the whole thing is in fact a giant ancient tree.
So really quick, I'm going to show you this, how the trees are fibers, and for some reason this shows the true color. A big chunk of this just fell off. See part of the grain. This is the way the fibers are right here. See? Hold on a second. And you see it's nothing but wood. Okay, so we're going to go down over here and I'll show you a little more. Okay, see here, and at an angle. Okay, all this, everything, this whole mountain in a 100-mile radius, come right over here. You see, This looks just like freshly chopped wood. We peeled a piece off of there. This is what we see. This is the wood. See that? That's just got the moss on it. And all this here, all the way back up in here, I'll show you that in a second. You come right here and you see, we'll peel a piece off here. It's just wood. It's so crazy.
Dominic began. A series of 31 missiles were shot straight up into the sky to test how high humans can actually reach. They quickly figured out not far at all.
It seems that whenever they were shooting these missiles up into the sky, they were actually interacting with different layers of this plasma field or this electromagnetic phenomena, and it seems to have fluid-like properties. As it actually hits a certain portion of this force field, if you will, it begins to disperse and seek equilibrium based on the impedance of the electromagnetic layers.
Why is it when we review this footage that these things are exploding? It looks like they're hitting a barrier.
Testing the strength of the firmament, and they weren't able to penetrate it.
What's going on there? What is this? In my opinion, I think that they were trying to find a way to possibly get out.
Ain't no pardons in the garden if you snake me. You can't break me. Tryna chase me. When it's rocky, I move bass up, you can't break me. I'm fine, I got my feet up. I ain't never scared, gon' put my heat up. I was outside and try no real. Where my ops at, God gon' eat up. Ain't nothing free us. Lock my family up, my mama told the judge he ain't no killer. It's all good, cause on that prison, he already preaching about the healer. Spread the ops out, now the cops out. Facing death, you wanna plea, but you can't cop out.
We know the truth now here. This is a mural in the tomb of Neket in Egypt from 1424 BC. What is this? Let's go find the real mural so I can show you. Now, with my research, this is the same mural, the original mural, on the wall. What is this right here? This is corn, people. Let's keep going. Now, this is Pharaoh Hatshepsut in 1470 BC. What is that at the top? That's also corn. These two pharaohs talked about they went to the land of Punt to get gifts to bring back to Egypt. They brought corn. I'm gonna show you what else they brought back. They brought incense back from Punt, leopard skins, ivory, gold of Amu. This is green gold. and they also bought back maize. Let's find out what green gold is. Roll the coin. Green gold is avocados. Where are avocados native to? Avocados, or green gold, is native to the Americas. Now let's see what they say about the land where they got these goods from. Let's keep going. The land of Punt, where they got corn, ivory, incense, green gold, which is avocados. Where is it? The land of Punt is their ancestors' original land. We know the truth now.
You saw the patch? Nah. So this is where it gets demonic. Oh. Each one of their spacesuits had a certain patch, the blue origin symbol on it, right?
Whoa.
But looking at it, it actually shows, you know, the Baphomet head, the demon, the devil head. It's on the patch. You flip it upside down, straight up, Baphomet head with the horns and the goat head. Beside it, what does it look like? Flames.
Oh my god.
What does it look like? A star. So people are saying this is some demonic, right? Yo, right when Katy Perry came out, she was holding a daisy like this. And throughout the whole trip playing with like a daisy like this, like looking at it.
What does that represent?
In occult and spiritual context, daisies are often associated with innocence of children.
No.
Yeah, obviously with Illuminati and the elites, what are they always known for? Taking advantage of innocence and children. Yo, the Baphomet, the god that eats, they sacrifice them, right? What is she holding? The symbol of that.
Hamas hides in hospitals and schools. Justifies bombing civilian infrastructure. Counter. Destroying hospitals, schools, and refugee camps doesn't become self-defense just because Israel claims Hamas is there. Civilians have the right to life regardless of military claims. If Israel loses one war, it will be wiped out. Purpose frames Israel as constantly on the verge of destruction to justify military aggression. Counter. Israel is the most militarized state in the region, backed by the world's largest superpowers. Palestinians, not Israelis, are the ones facing existential threats. Criticizing Zionism is anti-Semitic. Purpose shuts down any critique of Israeli policies. Counter. Zionism is a political ideology, not an ethnic or religious identity. Opposing a settler colonial project isn't bigotry. Palestinians celebrate terrorism. Purpose dehumanizes Palestinians and frames them as inherently violent. Counter. Palestinians resist occupation just like any oppressed people in history. Israeli propaganda criminalizes all forms of Palestinian resistance while normalizing Israeli violence.
If you didn't like geese before, I'm about to give you a new reason not to like them. Enslaved people didn't just have to escape overseers, dogs, and slave catchers. They also had to outsmart geese. These birds weren't just livestock. They were used as security alarms, a hidden tool of oppression during slavery. Geese are territorial, loud, and impossible to silence. Unlike dogs, they couldn't be bribed with food or scared into submission, and their piercing honks would alert enslavers and overseers if someone tried to escape. Some enslavers let geese patrol fences, barns, and roads, places where escapes were most likely. Their aggressive nature made it harder for enslaved people to slip away unnoticed. Unlike watchdogs, geese required no training. They instinctively defended their space. Enslaved people found ways to outmaneuver the geese, moving slowly and silently to avoid startling them, escaping during storms to cover the noise, and distracting them with food to keep them occupied. See, I bet y'all wasn't thinking about that, did you? Just always them damn geese. And this part of history is important to know because we see how every part of plantation life was designed to prevent escape. Even animals were used as tools of oppression. Yet enslaved people still resisted, strategized, and fought for freedom.
Pulled over by the cops after a protest?
Shut the fuck up. Cop just asking about your day?
Shut the fuck up. Feds, call your mom?
Boss lady, this man needs air conditioning. It's hot on the street, and he only can pay $49 a month. I'll cool him down, baby. No money down, no credit check, all the time.
Y'all want to hear some shit to really blow y'all's mind this morning? So, as a side hustle, I did graves and graveyards and cemeteries across Bowling Green and surrounding counties. Something didn't set right with me today. As I was digging, the guy that's the director of the graveyard walked up to me and he was like, we need to lift that casket up to get it even. So we put it on a tally and brought it back up. When we brought it back up, it come off even in a way, but it was crooked in the corner. So he's like, we got to lift it. So I lifted it, me and him together. But the weirdest thing was, it was really light. Like, extremely light. Like, and I'm not a big dude. So I was like, you know, I told him, I was like, why is that so light? He was like, don't ask questions that you ain't ready for. Y'all, I'm freaked out. What are they doing with these bodies? I was just informed that if I don't take the video down about the body not being in the casket, that I'm going to get fired. My boss called me and told me that the video's causing distraction from the funeral homes and the cemeteries. And that also, you know, it could cause them people to look elsewhere. That being said, it could cost him money for less burials. And me as well. I knew when I posted that there was a possibility, you know, something would be said, but I never dreamed that I could maybe be fired. But honestly, I feel like that I'm going to leave the video up, and whatever comes out of it, comes out of it. They did wrong, not me. No matter what nobody says in the comment, no matter what nobody tells you. Y'all, they just silenced the last half of my video when I was really getting to a point. Like, literally right now, I'm going out of town because I don't feel safe. I'm on the interstate I'm probably going to get a hotel or something. I'm really shook. I don't know what to think.
I hired a pair of young white men and a pair of young black men, and for each pair, I randomly assigned one individual in the pair a criminal record. What this means is none of the young men in the study who were posing as job applicants actually had criminal records in real life. But for the purposes of these applications, they communicated to employers that they had a felony conviction. So looking first at the outcomes for white testers, we see that about 34% of whites with no criminal record received a callback or job offer, compared to just 17% of whites with a criminal record. So we see that criminal record reduces employment opportunities by about 50%. In the case of black testers, 14% of those with no criminal background received a callback or job offer, relative to just 5% of blacks with a criminal record. A black applicant with no criminal background received callbacks or job offers at about half the rate of an equally qualified white applicant. But the most surprising finding was really related to blacks with no criminal background relative to whites with a felony conviction. We find that a white applicant with a felony conviction fared just as well, if not better, relative to a black applicant with a clean record. This suggests that being black in America today is essentially like having a felony conviction in terms of one's chances of finding employment.
When the Spanish conquistadors came here to the Arizona territory, they came across our ancestors and they asked them, they said, ¿Cómo se llama? Well, you think our ancestors spoke Spanish? So they replied, Pimach. Pimach means I don't know. So then those conquistadors said, oh, aquí los gente Pima Indios. They named us the I don't know Indians. And so that's where the word Pima comes from. So if you have any, if there's a senator here or an elected official from Pima County, I don't know county. If any of you went to Pima Medical Institute, I don't want you as my nurse. Again, Pima. But we call ourselves the Aquimarota, the river people. Our language is spoken from here all the way into Mexico. We have my brother's here. My brother to my right here, he's from Salt River, which is on the other side of Scottsdale. And then my brother here, in front of me to my left, he's from the Tohono O'odham Nation, which is next to Tucson, Arizona. And so again, we are a group of O'odham, and that's how we call ourselves in our language. Again, we're doing this land acknowledgement, recognizing that we are the original inhabitants, and we welcome all of you here this time. Sapa.
That's where I drew the line. I'm sure there were tons of seed oils and so on in the cake itself, but my point is, how does that even make its way onto the shelf, where the vast majority of people have no idea that all those dyes that are in our food, but not in the Europeans, can cause cancer? And so I'm giving my child cancer for her 14th birthday, which is a no.
What I don't understand is if there's enough preliminary data to suggest that there may be carcinogenic effects or genomic disruption or associations with attention deficit disorder, or a whole plethora of families that are saying, hey, once we started eliminating these petrochemical food colorings from the food of my child, their behavior improved. When you have enough of that, it's not, look, they're not giant randomized control studies over 10 years for each food dye. We're not going to get that. But when you have enough preliminary data to suggest these petrochemical food dyes are concerning, who then would conclude, you know what, let's just risk it. It's fine. We'll wing it. We'll be, the kids will maybe fine with, why do that?
Right.
When we have all of these chronic diseases increasing right in front of our eyes that were rare a generation ago. 1 in 22 boys in California now has autism. I mean, when you see these statistics, who says, you know what, it might be, some of these ingredients have been suggested. Europe doesn't have them. They don't need them. The food prices are not higher because they use beet juice and carrot juice and watermelon juice. I know you had Vani Hari on. She's a great champion for that. We're taking a close look at this, and I think you're going to hear some action in the coming weeks on this.
But recently, they found that controversy has come home to roost in their very own backyard. An infestation of Canadian brown finches, which is a small part... I guess I should have seen that one coming, huh?
Is really going on with this disease. And one was, I met a CIA black ops guy who said in 1962, the weirdest thing he'd ever done in his whole crazy apocalypse now career was dropping poison ticks on Cuban sugarcane workers. That was Operation Mongoose. So that was the first evidence that we had dropped ticks on a foreign country as a bioweapon. And then the other thing is, one of my filmmaker friends went out to Willy Bergdorfer, and in a very long interview, at the very end, he said, yeah, when I investigated the Lyme disease sickness in the late 70s, early 80s, there was another organism there. It wasn't just Lyme that was making people sick. It was, and I was told to cover it up. It was probably a rickettsia. He didn't release all the information, but what he said was confirmed by copies of his lab books and subsequent interviews that I had with him.
Pardon my ignorance, what is the disease you described, the other one? Rickettsia?
So it's a rickettsia. It is the same organism that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and that's the most deadly tick-borne disease in the United States. It also was a germ that was being weaponized by the U.S. military at the time, and they tried to stuff it in ticks. I mean, so what is tick weaponization? So in the interviews with Willie, what he said was, I spent over a decade in the biological weapons program, a contractor to Fort Detrick, working on weaponizing fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes, trying to mass produce them, stuffing fleas with the plague, stuffing mosquitoes with deadly Trinidad virus, Trinidad virus, and then stuffing ticks with either deadly or incapacitating diseases like relapsing fever, Venezuelan equine encephalitis, rabies, leptospirosis, which is another spirochete. So it's just like Dr. Strangelove trying to make new diseases, mixing bacteria and virus in ticks with the intent of, this is the perfect stealth weapon. It's poor man's nuke. You drop these insects on an enemy. It weakens the population. It ties up the medical resources, but doesn't destroy infrastructure like a nuclear bomb would. And in one report from a bean counter in the military, they said, tularemia, which is tick-borne tularemia, also rabbit fever, we can kill 10,000 people at $1.33 a life. So anyways, it was just, there was more to tick-borne diseases than we realized, and I began suspecting that Willie was right, given this context.
Meet you. My skin was messed up. Whether they're young or old, the best kind of friends are people who are friends of God.
Look, Sister Smith, and your brochures.
Hello, faggot lovers everywhere. I have a message for you from Birdseye. Birdseye faggots will appeal to your whole family. They've made them with lashings of gravy, but they've gone easy on the spice because kids don't like them too spicy.
Now, repeat after me. When the cops come calling, what do you do?
Shut